Hello, my name is Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, May 10th West Weather Update, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I think the story for this video will really be temperatures. The map you're looking at are the temperature anomalies over the last 7 days. We were quite cool across the west, certainly in California. You can see that's really the bullseye here, 10 to 11 degrees Fahrenheit below average just over the last 7 days. But even looking into the forecast, I think the dominant narrative here over the next 7 days, maybe even beyond that, will be temperatures and their associated influences on that snow melt that we've been talking about for what feels like a few weeks now. So we know the last 7 days cooler over California. The big impact that's had is it has slowed that snow melt, certainly for the Sierra Nevadas. We talked about flooding concerns earlier this year. Unfortunately, we still have some more of those to deal with, but at least just looking at the last few days, that has really slowed down that process. Now, some parts east of California in the upper Colorado River Basin, talking Utah, western Colorado, northern Arizona, still slightly cooler than average, but we're starting to get into normal temperature territory there over the last 7 days. And that has allowed some snowmelt to continue there. Now, some of the snowmelt there welcomed, helping to get the Colorado River levels improved. We'll talk about that in just a few slides here. Now, if I jump over and take a look at the current snow water content, we've looked at these graphs before. The blue line is where we're currently at for snow water content in California. Just looking at the different regions across the state here. The statewide snow water content is that final graphic there at the bottom. That's that blue line. You'll notice that we're still well above average for this time of year. That light blue curve is where we're typically at in a given year. And for the entire state of California, we're still at 318% above that normal curve for mid-May here. If we look at just the southern Sierra Nevadas, that's that next graphic up, the third one down, a mind-boggling 415% above normal. And unfortunately, just looking at that blue line, you can see we still have a tremendous kind of majority of that snow melt to melt our way through over the coming weeks, as unfortunately, to kind of spoil the forecast here, is going to start to warm up in a big way. So if you look closely at that graphic, you'll notice that just right at the end here, we've really flatlined, and that's the colder temperature pattern we just saw the last 7 days, that map we were just looking at. That gave us a brief respite, but unfortunately with the temperatures warming up into the forecast, I'm expecting that snowmelt to accelerate in a big way. We've already had some flooding concerns in the San Joaquin Valley, unfortunately expecting those to continue over the next 7 days, and then even a few weeks, potentially even 6 to 8 weeks beyond that, as we work through, again, what is a near or at record snowpack for California. Lake Powell, looking all the way over to the Colorado River Valley. If you look at this little hitch just a few weeks ago, that was the high flow release experiment we talked about. We watched a video of those big pipes opening up and throwing water into the Colorado River. That knocked down levels just a bit, but since then they have been rising pretty dramatically. That's that snow melt that's occurring across the upper Colorado River Basin. I expect this graph to continue to increase over the coming weeks, end up surpassing our peak in 2022, just as a result of we've had a bountiful snowpack that we still have to melt through in parts of western Colorado, Utah, and southern Wyoming, which all drain into the Colorado River. And I mentioned the water there is a bit more welcomed. We were dealing with water issues, obviously looking at very low levels in terms of Lake Powell just a few weeks ago. We've turned that around in a big way, and we're improving the water situation on the Colorado River as a result. Now, looking at current weather across the West, we'll just take a look at the current satellite picture across the whole U.S. here to get a picture of what kind of weather systems we're watching. The big one right now, kind of exiting the western region, really. Low pressure systems centered over the four corner states here. You can see they're causing some storms here just along the Continental Divide. Some lingering shower activity in Utah. But if you look across the western region, really not too much to speak of. Some lingering cloud cover, even some light rain showers here in parts of southern Oregon, but generally clearing up as we've moved out of this pattern of these kind of colder, rainier systems that moved through over the last 7 days. If we look even further out into the forecast, that story of at least calmer weather associated with precip continues. If we jump over to the ECMWF forecast, make this valid as of Wednesday evening here, there's those rain showers we touched on in southern Oregon and Utah, but as I take this through the evening, overnight Thursday, that system over the central U.S. starting to exit the area into the day Thursday, largely clear across the west. Can't rule out some showers sneaking into the far eastern part of Idaho here, but rather clear on Friday as well across the west. You will notice something I want to touch on here is that low pressure system that was quote unquote, exiting the area is still lingering around the northern plains here. And it's actually going to weakly, as it's kind of weakening, retrograde back across the Intermountain West this weekend. That's going to have some modest precipitation impacts here, and we'll touch on those just as we kind of go through the next few days here. That's through the night on Friday into Saturday, still largely clear across the west, but there's that low pressure system, kind of this weak upper level trough. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Trying to sneak, I say sneak because our weather systems typically move up here in the mid latitudes from the west to east. This one starting to retrograde, like I said, and sneak back over the Intermountain West. That will bring back some of these kind of afternoon rain shower, can't rule out a thunderstorm in the afternoon, chances to the Intermountain West, so parts of Utah on Sunday afternoon, Nevada, even southern Idaho, eventually working its way all the way into parts of Oregon or even Washington. And we'll just play this into Sunday afternoon here. Some of those afternoon storm chances getting into Nevada, parts of southern Oregon, Utah, potentially southern Idaho, even all the way to the leeward side of the Sierra Nevadas in California. Now, as I play this through Tuesday into Wednesday, this upper level trough is really kind of weakening to the point not having a huge impact. Perhaps Monday afternoon, still seeing some lingering showers and storm chances in the Snake River Basin, the Columbia River Basin. But by Tuesday, weakening, moving out of the area, potentially returning, at least getting into Wednesday into a more calmer pattern. Now, as this is occurring, we still have some temperature conversations to discuss. I'll touch on those in just a minute. Looking at the 7-day totals from the ECMWF, this is just flat precipitation totals that we're expecting. I mentioned that upper level kind of trough sneaking back over the area, but we're not talking significant rainfall amounts out of this. Really, the color bar here, anything yellow or above, we're talking an inch or above. Anything green or below, we're talking just a half inch of rain. So heaviest rain out of this, talking maybe a half inch in parts of eastern Nevada, parts of Utah. You notice Idaho, eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, western Nevada. Modest precipitation amounts here of a quarter inch. Can't rule out maybe a bit higher than that. If some areas are able to sneak in a thunderstorm that kind of lingers over an area, you could get as much, as an inch to an inch and a half from a thunderstorm, but it's hard to predict anything like that too specifically when we're talking, 3 to 6 days out in the forecast. Just something we're keeping an eye on. Now, temperatures over this time period, this is really kind of a weakening trough, so it's not going to have this huge impact in terms of colder temperatures. And areas that are kind of outside the influence of it will be warming up considerably through the weekend, particularly the Pacific Northwest, the Willamette Valley, and the western Washington area. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a bit here. California and parts of western Arizona as well warming up without the influence of that upper level trough overhead, like say in Nevada or southern Idaho. But largely across the western region, warmer temperatures over the next 7 days compared to average, and you can see that here on this map. Now, what is going on in this upper level height pattern, just to get a better idea of what we're seeing? I'll take this and make it valid as of Wednesday evening here. There's the upper level trough, these kind of blue colors here in the 500 millibar height pattern. That's associated with that low pressure system over the four corners. That's going to attempt to exit the area. I say attempt because you'll notice those lower heights, the bluer colors on this 500 millibar height anomaly map, kind of linger and try to move back over the Intermountain West as I take this through the weekend. So as I play this through Thursday, there's that upper level trough exiting into the central U.S. You'll notice it stalls there over the Nebraska Panhandle. While this is occurring, we have an upper level ridge building into the Pacific Northwest. That's going to increase the temperatures here in Washington and Oregon as we go into Friday and Saturday. As I play this forward, that ridge is now strengthening over Washington, strengthening over British Columbia, really anomalously so, to the point where parts of southwestern Canada here are expecting very warm temperatures, and they fortunately are dealing with some wildfire risks as a result of this. Kind of an unfortunate situation unfolding here, but Washington and Oregon being in such close proximity to that anomalous upper level trough, we're expecting warm temperatures into this weekend, talking daytime highs into the lower 90s in Seattle or Portland. Now, while this is occurring, as that ridge strengthens over Canada, you'll notice that troughiness that was kind of over the Nebraska Panhandle is going to retrograde and sneak under this ridge as we go through Sunday over the weekend. There's that upper level trough, very weak, right? That's why we didn't see a significant cool down in the temperatures there over the western region, and we're only expecting light precipitation amounts from that. But boy, this ridge it's a big ridge, very anomalous, expecting hot temperatures, potentially some record-breaking maximum temperatures recorded in parts of Canada. And again, just kind of as proximity to the ridge, expecting warm temperatures in parts of Montana, Washington, and Oregon as a result. Now that's taking this out through the weekend into Sunday. If I take this out into Monday, there's those upper level heights, those lower upper level heights exiting the area on Monday. And the only thing left to influence the weather out west is this big upper level ridge. So warming temperatures into the middle part of next week across the western region. And really not a huge change, even as we go into all the way out into Thursday of next week, May 18th, ridging dominating over the western U.S. Warmer temperatures, drier weather, largely across much of the western region. Now, this is taking you all the way out to next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, May 20th. We're still looking at that dominating upper level ridge, even still over parts of Canada, over Washington, and now Idaho and Nevada, which were under that weak kind of influence maybe very early over next week, now under the influence of a dominating upper level ridge, hotter, drier weather as a result. Still looking at that ridge here, even a week out. If I take you back in the forecast to even Sunday of this weekend, you'll notice we have ridge here in the jet stream. Otherwise, we could call this a high pressure system, higher heights in the jet stream. Lower heights here, troughiness below that. Anytime we get a high over a low like this, we call this, as meteorologists, a Rex block. And it's not named after T-Rex, actually named after a meteorologist named Daniel Rex, who identified this in the 50s, but it tends to block up the pattern in terms of the atmosphere. We tend not to get as many systems moving through, and it can entrench a pattern for quite a number of days, even weeks at a time. So it's not a surprise seeing this Rex block. That really what we mean by that blocking is here is what would be our next precipitation maker or our next weather maker, cooling things down, bringing some precipitation onshore in the west. It's here well off the west coast. You know, you could argue that in a typical situation, that's going to try to make its way over and move into some part of the western coast, but it's blocked by this Rex block that's positioned over the western continental U.S. and Canada. And you'll notice that as I take this through next week, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th of May, all the way through next week, our quote-unquote what might be our next weather system is still just entrenched well off the west coast of the United States. This ridge still dominating over the western U.S. So it's doing its job in the sense of Rex blocking the situation here. And Daniel Rex really identified kind of this pattern. Whenever you have this Rex block situation, it tends to block up the atmosphere. And that plays into our forecast where we expect these higher heights, hotter temperatures, drier weather to linger through next week and potentially even beyond that. These blocks can really dominate the pattern for as much as 2 weeks, even more than that. Now, we're not quite seeing that all the way through the end of May. We'll talk on that in terms of a long-range forecast, but I wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at. One other kind of curious thing I'm seeing in the height field here, we do have the ridging here over the western U.S., really kind of centered over Canada, but we have these lower heights here all the way down into Mexico. The heat that's building into the west here, particularly the Intermountain West, that's going to help generate some low pressure systems toward the desert southwest. This kind of upper level troughing here is going to help funnel some moisture into the desert southwest as well. And I think that's going to help keep things wet in parts of New Mexico, potentially eastern Arizona as we get into next week. In fact, those upper level heights really kind of entering the picture as early as Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And that's going to help focus some precipitation and moisture into Arizona and New Mexico. Whether it gets all the way over into the lower Colorado River Valley, not quite sure, but it does increase the chances of that late next week. That's very early for when that kind of monsoon low pressure system kind of sets up. Not necessarily the monsoon here, what we're looking at, more of kind of an anomaly in the height field, but could see some very anomalous precipitation as a result of this in eastern Arizona and New Mexico, what is typically a dry time of the year before the monsoon season really starts in earnest over the summer. If we look at temperatures out into next week, so we looked at them earlier over the next 7 days, but I wanted to show you kind of starting after those weaker heights move out of the area, out of the Intermountain West. This is looking really over the 7-day period starting next Monday, going 7 days beyond that to the Monday all the way out into May 22nd. So really looking at temperature anomalies from May 15th out to May 22nd. You can consider that kind of the week 2 time frame. And you can see very warm across the west as a result of that dominating upper level ridge. Cooler all the way down into Mexico and parts of New Mexico and Arizona that are under the influence of more precipitation, anomalous precipitation moving into the area. And what does that look like in terms of 7-day precipitation anomaly amounts? Again, looking over that same time period, kind of May 14th through May 20th, out into next week, We see drier across the Pacific Northwest, drier across really much of the western region as a result of that upper level ridge. But where we do see precip is where we had those upper level heights starting to get precipitation and moisture into New Mexico, eastern Arizona, potentially, nothing definitive at this time, but a rogue shower or thunderstorm can't be ruled out, sneaking over into the lower Colorado River Valley. Now the Gila River Basin, very likely to get some precipitation and increased water amounts as a result of this pattern here. If we're trying to forecast beyond that, I talked about this Rex block, how it tends to entrench a pattern over a number of days, really sometimes a number of weeks. We have seen the MJO slow down a bit in the forecast. Just a few days ago, it was really kind of screaming across the maritime continent, out of the Indian Ocean into Indonesia, and we expected it could continue to do that as it got out into the Pacific. It has begun to slow down a bit. It has slowed down and weakened a bit, and it's expected to kind of meander and stay in phases 6 and 7 at least through mid-May. And that's helping us kind of slow down the pattern, helping that Rex block to set up over the western U.S. If this stayed kind of screaming through here through 6, 7, into 8, through mid to late May, I would expect this pattern to break down rather quickly, potentially getting another weather maker into parts of California or the Pacific Northwest. But right now, as this MJO is kind of slowing down, meandering in phase 6 and 7, I think that's associated with that slowing down of the pattern we see over the western U.S. with that Rex block there. Nonetheless, this forecast goes really out just to that last week of May. But if we can get phase 7 into phase 8, that would potentially help kick that upper level ridge out of here. We might get a break in those warmer temperatures. But those warmer temperatures, we started this video talking about snowmelt. Those warmer temperatures that are forecasted here over the next week to 2 weeks are going to be a concern for snowmelt, especially for the San Joaquin River Valley beneath a lot of that record-breaking snowpack that still exists. We still have a majority of that snowpack to melt through in parts of the Central Valley of California. We'll have to watch that for concerns. Last thing I want to touch on, ocean temperatures have been changing meaningfully just over the last few days. If you look closely at the Central Tropical Pacific, we are warming up the ocean temperatures right along the equator here. That's that black line running across the middle of the screen. That's really our developing El Nino. Strong likelihood we see El Nino develop officially some point this summer in 2023. It is, if anything, ahead of schedule in terms of some of these forecasts. So we are expecting El Nino to develop this summer. If we look closely, we've talked about the dominating influence of this negative PDO signature. That's these cooler or bluer colors here off the west coast of the U.S. Those have even begun to erode over the last few days here as well. We talked about how as we got into May, the influence of this negative PDO would begin to erode as we went towards summer, and a strengthening El Nino would work in tandem, would work to erode this negative PDO. Now, the negative PDO is what was partially responsible for keeping those colder temperatures lingering across the western U.S. over the last few weeks. As this influence starts to erode, I think that's also playing into some of these higher temperatures that we're expecting in the forecast here. And I think we're going to see this PDO this negative PDO, I should say, continue to erode as we see this El Nino begin to strengthen. Now, not officially in an El Nino yet, but we're getting closer and closer as we go through May here, keeping an eye on this closely. Biggest impact, at least immediately this summer, would be helping to weaken the desert monsoon as a result of a subtropical jet stream that typically sets up in this area in summer that disrupts the predictability of that desert monsoon cyclone. That's the most immediate impact. The kind of correlations to temperature and precipitation beyond that in the western region, not as clear over the summer, but potentially drier for parts of the Pacific Northwest and hotter there as well this summer. The bigger, more predictable impacts would be all the way out into the next water year, starting in October through the early part of winter, where we'd expect, as a result of that subtropical jet, more precipitation moving into parts of Southern California, potentially even Arizona and Nevada as well. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on, just because of the proximity to El Nino, Hawaii has impacts as well. El Nino tends to increase precipitation, at least for this year, later in the year, kind of before their water season, or their water year typically starts over winter. Another impact that it can have, although less predictable, is during these El Nino years, we typically see more hurricane development in the eastern Pacific, and that just increases the likelihood that one of those is able to sneak its way over and impact the state and the islands of Hawaii. Now, again, hard to predict because these tracks can weaken, they can dodge the island, but the right one, just kind of out of coincidence, if it makes its way all the way to Hawaii, is something to watch. And in the past, we have seen some of the more impactful hurricanes And even just recently in the last decade, some of the biggest near misses have occurred during these El Nino years. So that's something we'll keep an eye on later this year, the hurricane season being kind of at the end of summer and the early autumn period. That is all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.